confused.
Good evening. I'm Marissa Bowers. I'm the chair of the Committee of the Whole, and I'm calling to order tonight our Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, September 26th. We have a lot of folks here joining us tonight who may not usually come to council meetings, so I did want to go over just a couple of things. It's a committee meeting. This is an opportunity for discussion and for council members and the administration to have a dialogue not just about items that might come before us for a vote, but also about educating us about things so that we can make better decisions in the future related to items that might come before us. There is no opportunity for public comment tonight, but we do have opportunities for public comment at our regular council meetings, which are on the first and third Mondays of the month at 7 o'clock. We have a new video comment feature so that if people are not able to physically be here and would like to submit a video comment to be displayed during hearing of visitors, there is a link to that on the City Council page of the Gahanna.gov website. You're also always welcome to email us at council@gahanna.gov if you would like to weigh in or speak on your opinion about a particular matter. Okay. As far as tonight's agenda goes, we have two items under discussions, and the first item under that discussion is our number 4 of our economic development training series. This was a series that was put together through cooperation by council and the administration. Director of Economic Development Nate Strum has been bringing in a series of presenters to speak on topics related to economic development, incentives, and land use throughout Gahanna. Tonight's presentation will be about a half an hour or so in length, with perhaps some questions and dialogue from council members at the conclusion of the presentation by our guest. After we move on from discussions, we have 3 items that are coming from council office that we'll be discussing. And then one of those, I think, will include a presentation regarding the rezoning of a parcel of land. That presentation will be informational, coming from the administration and the applicant to council for council to have an opportunity to ask questions. There will be a public hearing on that ordinance on October 17th. So in addition to public comment, there will be a more formal opportunity for opponents and proponents of that rezoning to weigh in at that time. We'll conclude the agenda tonight with 2 items from the Department of Administrative Services regarding staffing expenditures and the pay policy. All right, with that, I'd like to welcome Jeffrey Harris, who's of council at Bricker and Eckler, and Director Strum. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 4th installment of your favorite economic development series, focusing this evening on return on investment, or ROI. As Councilwoman Bowers noted, I'm joined with my great friend, Jeff Harris. Jeff and I had the distinct pleasure of working side by side when he was with Knox County and I was with Licking County way back in the day. But even before that, Jeff cut his teeth working for the Ohio Department of Development before heading over to Worthington, their Economic Development Office, heading off to Knox County, and then, as noted, he is of counsel with Bricker and Eckler. He's still a phenomenal person, even if he is a practicing attorney. He's also one of the lead writers and experts in economic development. As a member of the Ohio Economic Development Association, I can tell you that Bricker and Eckler is our chief counsel partners. And so Jeff and I regularly collaborate on things in the space around economic development policy, opportunity, and how do we make sure we continue to move the state forward in those spaces. So I'm thrilled this evening to introduce you to my great friend Jeff as he gives his presentation this evening on filling the financing gap, taxpayer funds merely enabling developer to buy her kid a BMW 7 Series. Thanks, Jeff. That's a great title for your series this evening. I thank you for that.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Nate. And members of council, it's my pleasure to be here. As Nate said, I'm an attorney at Bricker and Eckler, but I come to you having done state and local economic development for about 20 years before I joined the law firm. All that time I was a lawyer, and I would take it as a huge compliment that, oh, I didn't know you were a lawyer. So thanks. I guess I was somewhat pleasant. And I know we have lawyers on the on council, so I didn't mean that. And other elected officials too. But there is a reason I have the title on that slide, and then I'm going to breeze through these. I'm told I have 4 hours to talk. Is that right? Yeah. All right. But I want to walk through, as part of Nate and the administration's walking council through economic development concepts, I want to walk you through the idea of return on investment and when, as often happens, communities overpay for development. So we're going to talk about that today. Hence my title here, that are you using taxpayer dollars in economic development to turn a private investor's return on investment for a real estate development deal from a 12% return to a 30% return in theory, so that she can go out and buy her 16-year-old son a BMW 7 Series when he could have just done just fine with a Nissan Sentra, which was my first car. If the clicker works. There we go. Okay, thanks. This is taken from a larger presentation I've done before. I'm not going to go through in detail a lot of the slides, and towards the end I'll be able to knock a few of them off in the interest of time. What we want to talk about tonight is just how to fill the financing gap when we do see development deals come to the city of Gahanna. And you are asked to bless economic development financial incentives that Nate may be bringing to you, or the administration may be bringing to you, and how to ascertain what's the right amount to throw at a project from taxpayer funds. We'll talk about Economic Development 1.0, which is the old style, I'll call it, and then we'll talk about Economic Development 2.0, which is, I like to think, the more enlightened current era in which we operate. There are things that are well beyond Nate's control as your Economic Development Director. We'll talk about that. And then, if you haven't noticed already, I have a number of automobile metaphors throughout this thing, just trying to make it interesting. How to negotiate the extra floor mats to be thrown in when you buy your car. This is our real quick, we've got a resource document that I just updated this month. This is clocking in at over 120 pages, I think now. This is a guide to all of Ohio's economic development incentive programs, and there's a lot, but it also includes federal programs. I happen to be one of the team leads at Bricker on the use of ARPA funds, which has a tremendous amount of opportunity for the right uses. We have ARPA in there, among other things. That was our shameless plug. But I'll get right to it. The Ohio Constitution clearly understands and appreciates that local government, and by that I mean counties, townships, and of course city of Gahanna, can and will get involved in private transactions, specifically around creation or preserving jobs, improving the economic welfare of the state, or for those key areas: industry, commerce, distribution, and research. Those 4 words show up a lot in the revised code when we talk about doing economic development. But at its core, what Nate is doing and what I used to do for Knox County and the city of Worthington, and what everyone in our field does, is they intervene into otherwise private transactions. Intervene, and why? It's either to grow a tax base, or it's to address market imperfections. Market imperfections, from an economics course 101, idea is the notion that the private market fails to properly account for certain things in life, so that a business owner may make the purely rational decision that she's going to walk away from a building because it's obsolete, it's no longer worth the upkeep, and she leaves. She leaves the building behind because she doesn't need it anymore, and it's quite frankly easier to just walk away. That's a market imperfection because somebody's got to clean up the mess, and that somebody is, in this case, the city of Detroit. That's the old Packard facility that they abandoned back in the 50s. It's still there, unfortunately. A more recent example is what turned into the Columbus City Center Mall, so that you had a 1.3 million square foot mall. It was the cat's meow. I was here to have seen it in its heyday. I'm sure many, many of you were. And it had the Bendels at the top floor, big deal, right? It was really nice, except it was an enclosed mall built for suburban audiences in a downtown environment, and the market caught up to it. And so that it was demolished in 2009, well within the lifespan of the building materials. well within the space's design lifespan. And now it's turned into a beautiful, as we all know, you don't need the pictures, I'm sure you've been there, it's quite nice. That was a market imperfection where the property owners, the real estate investment trusts, all those different sophisticated investors said, we're walking out of here, we're getting out in terms of the building itself. The tenants themselves said, the Bendels I just referenced, they said it's not worth it to us. So they head out. Market decision, perfectly rational, leaves behind a big gaping 1.3 million square foot empty building, which was quite depressing to walk through. When I used to walk through it from the parking garage to my office, it was a pretty desolate place. So when we get involved, we being the royal we, right? It's Nate, it's attorneys like me, it's city councils, it's county commissioners. When we get involved in private transactions, and we are trying to push tax-based growth. What are we talking about? We're either talking about payroll tax, or rather, how are we getting involved, I should say. It's through payroll tax credits, it's real property tax exemptions. There's a lot of acronyms on this screen. There's a ton of alphabet soup around this, and if you're a government junkie like me, you love it. If you're a member of the lay public, you probably hate it. My God, all these words and acronyms, there's too many, but each of them have a purpose. Diversion of tax revenue, and the most common and the most popular being TIF, or tax increment financing. And then special purpose entities that can create their own tax obligations or their own self-assessments. But when Nate and others in this field are getting involved in intervening into private transactions with your authorization, you have to ask, and he has to ask, what is it that I'm desired as my outcome? I'm going to try to grow sustainable job paying, sustainable payroll, good jobs in my community, or I'm going to try to revitalize my downtown. But then questions come up. Is it worth getting involved in particular transactions? Or there are certain project types that just simply the city or Nate or others will not support, don't want to get involved. A classic example when I was in Knox County was we had a lead for a project coming in. They wanted a pet food manufacturer, wanted some space. Well, pet food manufacturing has a heavy component of meat rendering. In our community, I told them flat out, they're not going to go for it here. That's a project we're gonna pass on. There may be other undesirable project types that each community has to decide, do they want to get involved or not? And where do you want to encourage that growth? So it's a location aspect. We have to be careful when we get into economic development with public finance and the public trust and using taxpayer dollars, that there is an urge to simply do something. I had a conversation with a colleague of mine last week when I was Knox County's Economic Development Director. I tried to think, what can I show on a tally sheet that I actually accomplished? Not a whole lot, quite frankly. I had a lot of long days, a lot of grueling days, I'm sure Nate does too. And most of it is just trying to lay the groundwork or set the table for projects that are coming. Because almost every real estate development deal I've ever worked on is at least 3 years in length, from start to finish, and usually they're longer than that. And so there's an urge for economic developers to just do stuff, show up in the newspaper, make sure you do a lot of shovel turnings for groundbreakings, and make haste, right? But we have to be careful, because in order to just do something means sometimes the government may be getting overly involved in a project that they don't have to. Or thinking through offering carrots to come into one's community. We want to be careful that there are people like me who are quite mercenary, who know how to say just the right things to leverage the specific types of incentives or deals that could be made. And so we want to make sure that we think through, why are we being asked to contribute, and are we being shopped around just for the best deal for a private developer? All perfectly reasonable. All, hey, it's the American way to make a profit, but we just want to be careful when we have taxpayer dollars involved. So economic development is best viewed as just acknowledging there are rules to the game, and your own Mr. Strum is quite knowledgeable, and he's quite good at this. He just knows there are rules to this game, but we want to make sure we respect guardrails. And so a lot of these things are, the Goldilocks and the porridge, right? So what's the right temperature? It's to grow your community, including your school district. It's to build up infrastructure, and it's to really make sure that your community is well suited for the incoming deal and that you structure it just right. So the old way of doing it, and I started in economic development in the year 2000. I got out of grad school and I started the Department of Development, which, by the way, it's funny, I showed up here tonight. Gahanna is this origin story of so many economic development careers. William Murdoch and Sadiqa White, I've known them all, Anthony Jones, Nate Schrum, that it's just a nice place to have grown up a lot of top talent in economic development. And so I've run across these folks over the last 22 years. And when I started the Department of Development in 2000, there was still the old style of thinking. And I remember dealing with some of the folks who'd been doing economic development since the 80s, and there was a notion that you just get out and you do whatever you can to create jobs and just do stuff. Strike as many deals as you can, award out as incentives as much as you can, put out there on the website that you'll take any deal, 100% abatement for 15 years, which is the state maximum, by the way, on certain products. And that's just what you do. And that's actually the ecosystem in which I learned economic development. But I started asking myself questions, and so did a number of others, including William Murdoch and Nate and others, right? Because, well, wait a second. When we're negotiating public dollars and public involvement through taxpayer funds, shouldn't we start every deal from your standpoint at zero? A developer comes and says, I need the city to give me a tax abatement, an income tax credit, some form of incentive. I need land for free. That's a common one in certain parts. In that economic development 1.0, the ecosystem in which I learned economic development, was you just did it because you want to get that newspaper headline and you want to get that. It sounds cynical. I guess I'm cynical as I'm old. I am old, yeah, I'm a little jaded. But that notion that you just get as many deals on your tally sheet as you can, quantity over quality. But where we start to think about this is, well, what's the quality of the incoming deal? What are the quality of the jobs that are being shown to the city? And what is it that the developer actually needs to get the project to pencil out? And give no more than that. So oftentimes in economic development 1.0, the old style, it was damn the torpedoes, get those deals done, and abate real property taxes, and we'll send the schools a perfunctory notice that we have to under state law that, hey, we're going to do this, and you can send us a letter, but we're still going to go forward. And when I was in Worthington, there was a certain large city that had a significant amount of students in that school district, and that certain large city, which will remain nameless, would just send the perfunctory notices to the Worthington School Board saying, hey, we're doing a 100% deal for 15 years, or 75% deal for 10 years, rather. Live with it. And it was incredibly frustrating for that school district to receive those letters, and there wasn't a darn thing they could do about it. So through that experience, through other experiences I've seen, it was the notion that, hey, if economic development 1.0 was damn the torpedoes, offer up any project you could, as many incentives as you could, think through, let's start back at 0% of what we're willing to offer to a developer. Let's bring in the school district and have a collaborative conversation about whether or not this is a deal worth taking. Ask what the schools need as part of an economic development negotiation. That's anathema to some of the old style economic developers, which was, hey, they'll still get their cut of net new development. I actually found it to be much more beneficial to say, what else could you get, schools, that I could help you get, because we're a collaborative enterprise. I thought that was a useful way to take it. And the idea that so many times that, in my experience, and I'm sure Nate's as well, if you put yourselves out there, not you as a city, but just in the general sense, as we will incent heavily any project that comes at us. We will go to the state maximum level. It's like the signs that say state, beer at state minimum prices, right? If you put a sign out that says, state incentives at state maximum levels, I would argue you're probably overpaying for development. And that a Nissan Sentra could have gotten the deal done instead of giving that developer the BMW 7 Series because they made so much more on their return than maybe they were anticipating because so much of taxpayer dollars was thrown at the deal itself, right? So, at the end of this, I've got a slide or two that shows you what I mean by this, but having a frank conversation, which I know Nate's very good at, with developer XYZ, and they come in, they say, well, Nate, we need a real property tax abatement. We need 100% for 15 years, which is the state max. And Nate says, and I'm speaking for Nate here, but go with me on this. Well, let me see your pro forma. What's your investment Excel spread look like? And you see.
So far, he's right. Okay, continue.
And you walk through, and it's a collaborative conversation. It's a give and take, and you say, well, okay, I can see here on the sheet that you need about $300,000 to get this deal across the finish line. But I ran the numbers in my own office, I being Nate, and if I
That's
gave
the
you,
ROI tax sheet that everyone sees.
Yep, if I gave you a 15-year, 100% abatement, that actually nets out to, make up a number, $700,000. I'm overpaying for this development if you've told me, and we've agreed to a $300,000 gap in your financing. That's what I mean by that joke about if you don't need to give so much in taxpayer funds to get a deal done that then the developer's singing off to the car dealership saying, hey, I'm going to get a really nice car because I wasn't expecting that largesse from the city. So that we think through things less than the state maximum. It's a 6-year, 40% abatement may just cover that budget hole. And be careful of the magic words. Nate, I'm sure if you had a nickel for every time, well, we're thinking about Indiana, I don't know, it's either Gahanna or, we might move to southeastern Michigan.
I really don't. I love Louisville, Kentucky, but if I have that city used on me one more time.
Right. And it's because folks who have people like me working for them know that if you say out-of-state competition, you immediately draw down Jobs Ohio and state-level incentives beyond just what the city could do. And the folks know. They're the magic words in the deal. And so you have to deal with that. That's the rules of the game. And Nate knows how to play those rules. So then we ask ourselves, what is it going to take for the public investment? How much of the public investment will it take to get a deal to pencil out? And what is the developer's capital stack? If a developer has purely a little sliver of his own skin in the game, but then most of the rest is either leveraged debt or public investment, especially if it's heavy on public investment, you may want to run clear. Like, well, wait a second, your business model is mostly government investment. That's a problem. How are you going to make money? And how is it, is there enough here that I can show you in a net present value sense, using Nate's calculator that he uses here, what the current value of any incentive may be today, that we could walk through and understand how a city incentive sheet looks to a developer. And the capital stack that we think through is one that grants that are offered by public agencies or public entities like the city, and then it's the developer's own equity, and then it's a series of debt layers that are typically added on with then higher and lower risk profiles, with the grant money from cities and counties and the state being of the highest order to a developer because it's the lowest risk. Yeah, other people's money. That's right, other people's money. So when folks are coming to the city, I would argue, and I've argued this my entire career, or at least once I started to turn a little jaded eye to these economic development deals, is that we want to remember that somebody coming to you with a project is typically not just shopping homogeneous communities. They've come to Nate already because they've either liked the property that they've seen, they like the city, their wives are from here, their kids play, there's always some connecting point. Usually there's some connecting point to the home community and them asking or wanting to bring the project. So that means, in theory, You don't have to overpay for something that they already want to do in the first place, right? And remember, too, that anytime somebody tells Nate, well, I may pick up and move to Fort Wayne, Indiana, the amount of cost to relocate is phenomenally high. And I've called bluffs a few times in my career where I said, really? Are you really going to move to Fort Wayne? Well, no, not really. You know, my kids are still in high school. I'm not going anywhere. Great, good. So what's it going to take to get the deal to pencil out at an amount that is reasonable for the taxpayer, but also gets you what you need without me being the dumbest money in the deal? And sometimes it's okay to say no. Sometimes it's okay to say, that's a great project. I wish you well. I hope you move into that building, but we're not going to put any public dollars into it. I did that most recently in my local career with a call center, where they called and said, we want to put a new 100-seat call center in a community. Great. What will you give us? Nothing. Because call centers can pick up and move. There's hardly any fixed asset investment, and the turnover for employees is extremely high. And the wages aren't all that great. This is all pre-COVID, of course. But the idea was, I still want the deal. I'm just not going to put any taxpayer dollars into it, and it's okay. Now, that goes to the point I made that if I think back to my own career, what did I show for my last job? Well, not a whole lot, because I walked away from a call center, which the call center came anyway, by the way, because I knew it would. So you think through, like, you know, it's the old Alfred Hitchcock joke, right? About, or the who's the guy with the funny pipe? Sherlock Holmes. The case of the dog that doesn't bark, right? So
That's Alfred Hitchcock? I think that's Sir Conan Doyle.
yeah, right. Thank you, Nate. The idea that you get projects without necessarily getting a lot of credit for it, because you're just in the background saying, that's a good deal worth going for, or that's a deal not worth going for, and allowing the public dollars to filter out as they should. And ask the question, and he has to do this too whenever he sees projects coming at him, is the juice worth the squeeze? Somebody may say, well, we really need investment from the city. And it may be that, well, that's my timer, I got 4 more minutes, right? It may be that, hey, and I've actually been on the receiving end of these phone calls. I really want a real estate tax abatement. Okay, what are you talking about? And you go through the litany of questions and you understand the project, and it turns out that actually they will not get a whole lot of benefit from that deal. And so I will say to them, well, you're going to pay more in an attorney to read your contract I'm going to send you than you'll get in your first year of benefit. You then have to pay me $500 a year to be in the program, which then continues to take down your modest benefit. And at some point, it just may not be worth doing the deal to you, property owner or developer. And these are the kind of questions and answers and conversations that Nate has every day, and I've had them too, is understanding what is it going to take to get the project done, and sometimes it's not worth it. So things that are outside Nate's control, things that were outside my control. There may be folks who are ideologically opposed to financial incentives, so free market should carry the full weight.
Not council.
Yeah. However, the local school board and how they function or not. The classic township versus municipality versus county tension point. If I had a nickel for every time I had a township, or rather a city, call me and say, well, I don't get along with our township. Well, okay, that's the 3rd call I've had today. It's okay. It happens everywhere in Ohio. Not so much here, but certainly out in the rural areas. Private ownership of what otherwise would be ideal properties to develop. Those are things that, Nate, you've probably had your eye on some key properties, and you can't do anything about it. If Farmer Brown doesn't want to sell it to you, you're not going to get it. Yep. And then whatever comes from the state in terms of whether or not they support a project. So these are some of the programs that Nate has available to you through TIF and Community Reinvestment Area and enterprise zones. But what I want to go through here real quick, and you'll have this slide deck, and I'm happy to take any questions that you all may have. Hell, I'll even come back. So this is an example of some of the number crunching that we do, that Nate does, to understand what's the bottom line that helps a deal get done. Just a quick example, but this is one that I like to tout. And this is a grocery store that came to Worthington a few years ago. And when they came in, they said, look, we need $110,000 to pay for a relocation of a storm sewer beneath that grocery store. $110,000. And we said, great, okay, show us your pro forma. And we understood it. And we had a frank conversation with the developer. Yep, 110 grand, that's what we need for the sewer relocation. And so we designed a TIF to actually get the $110,000 paid to the developer and not a penny more. And the remaining balance, so if we saw $277,000 in net present value to that TIF, the remaining $167,000 went into the city for other related infrastructure. After this deal closed, the developer called and said, well, wait, can I get more of that beyond that 110,000? And I said, no. You asked for $110,000, and you showed us your estimate from the vendor. That's how much it would cost to relocate that sewer line. You get 110, that's what we wrote the agreement for, we're done. Because they didn't understand that the way that these things flow is you actually could see even beyond the $110,000 in revenue to that TIF fund. And so we said that was the deal that was struck. We don't want to overpay for the development. We'll take the other $167,000 for what the city needed for its own infrastructure, and the deal was done. So with that, my phone or my watch went off twice, which tells me to stop talking, and I am happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And you guys think I'm a card. This is where I learned my stuff from.
That's great.
Thank you so much. This is really fantastic. Questions from council?
Well, I want more.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Mr. Weaver. Yeah.
You go ahead, Madam Chair.
No, I was just going to echo Ms. Angelou's comments that I could honestly say I'm nerding out with you, and that's a good thing because I'm really enjoying this presentation and the way you're delivering it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councilman Weaver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, for being here. I really do appreciate it. This whole economic development series has been fantastic from one presentation to the next. So thank you very much. I feel you really hit the nail on the head. We do expect developers to have a little skin in the game. And at the same time, we need to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. I think my colleagues and I all would agree with me that these projects should result in a symbiotic benefit to both the property owner, the developer, as well as the betterment of the community. And our Director Strum does a really fantastic job of laying that out for us. Those ROI spreadsheets are really great, and so thank you, Director, for that. I did have one question. Could you explain a bit further about when Jobs Ohio gets involved and what sort of additional incentives that they're able to offer from the state level as compared to at the municipal level?
Sure. Yeah. And Nate, chime in here. Sure. Yep. So you'll see Jobs Ohio get involved on projects that are attraction-based, so net new projects coming into the state of Ohio, including the city. If they are identifying the city as a potential location, and that involve interstate competition. So it is a project that a site selector is a vendor who's hired by a company to say, go out and find me a site. I need 500 acres with rail service and whatever the bells and whistles of the land would be. And that site selector, they're typically, they're agnostic for sure. They could care less where the project lands. It could be anywhere from Pennsylvania to Iowa and any point in between. And they will send out feelers, and they'll send out notes to all the states in between Pennsylvania and Iowa and say, we need 500 acres with rail service, and give us what you've got. And so then that bait, right, if you will, gets picked up by all those states. Here would be Jobs Ohio. And Jobs Ohio will then filter it down to its regional network, which for our region is the One Columbus network, which you're all part of. And so then Nate will receive an email from One Columbus saying, we have a lead. They want 500 acres. They want rail service. Do you have anything? Of course, in this case, maybe not. That may be a big
Yeah, I'm going to say no.
Yeah. But the Jobs Ohio folks get involved because it's an interstate competition. It's a project from elsewhere that's not in Ohio that is thinking about not only Ohio but other states. Jobs Ohio would say, we want to win that project. We will then get involved with our own bevy of incentives that they have. They have a lot of grant programs. They have a lot of low interest, no interest loans. They do the job creation tax credit negotiations that the state offers.
I was going to jump in. So their biggest carrot in the conversation is their JCTC, the Job Creation Tax Credit, which is a credit against the commercial activity tax or CAT tax that the state has. It's a fully refundable tax credit. So if the generation of the CAT in an annual year is less than the value of the JCTC, then those dollars are actually directly refunded to the company above and beyond. Other major grant programs that they have are in the data center area, so they do a sales tax exemption on the operations and needs towards its data centers. R&D has a tax credit incentivization, and some of the larger stuff that you've seen even more recently with some of the larger projects that won't go be named here, but maybe valued in the 10 to 20 billion range, is a lot of infrastructure improvements. So there's a lot of infrastructure funds available either directly through Jobs Ohio or through their related agency at Ohio Department of Development, ODOT, and other related entities. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Schnetzer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Harris, thank you for your presence today and for the presentations. Very engaging. A lot of questions, but I'll just, for the sake of time here, stick with one. The prior back and forth with Councilman Reaver was dealing with interstate competition, and I think you had mentioned that was one of the magic words out there. Do you have any guidance, thoughts, best practices regarding intrastate and perhaps even intra-regional? I know Gahanna is not the only community that's effectively fallen victim to what we'll call poaching by other communities. You know, it happens. So just curious if you have any thoughts or guidance on kind of how to deal with that. And would an agreement between regional communities even be something feasible or appropriate?
I would love to handle that one, actually, because there is a handshake within the Mid-Ohio Development Exchange, which is a sister agency to One Columbus. Matt McAllister referenced this previously. There is a handshake arrangement that there is no poaching. That in instances of growth and opportunity within organic needs, if a company were to knock on my door today, and I'll use the example, I actually shared this with Councilman Padova and Councilman Weaver earlier. If a community comes to my office or a company comes to my office and says, hey, I'm over in Delaware and I'm looking to grow in Gahanna, my first conversation isn't actually to that company. My first conversation is to the city of Delaware. And I say, hey, listen, you need to go talk to that company, make sure they can fit the needs, because they're looking over here. And I want to talk to them, but I want to do so when I absolutely know that they're not going there, because the last thing I want is my counterpart in Delaware having the same conversation with the company from Gahanna. There is a mutual respect in that space. And we do have that arrangement. And quite frankly, because we don't want to have all the regional economic developers going around to everyone else's communities, drumming up and ginning up their own leads based upon businesses that are upset at their local communities. It's not worth it, quite frankly, Councilman. So we do have that arrangement.
What Nate just described is that economic development 1.0. It really was a thing 30 years ago.
Was.
You get your contact list of the next town over, and you start cold calling on companies saying, hey, I've got land over in my community. That actually was a thing. And I'd run into some of the old timers like, that's what you did. And you say, oh my God, that's so counterproductive, because probably half the workers are living in your community already. And what are you doing? So anyway, but my other thought on that, council member, is if you've got a company that is shopping around for incentives, I would typically take, I would almost want to say, well, wait a second, I want to get to know you. What are you about? Who are you? Why are you looking at me? What other communities you're looking at? And try to understand, are they just doing it on literally $1 and cent incentive? They just want to get the juiciest deal that they can around I-270 Outer Belt? Or is there some compelling reason they want to be in your community? And that happens sometimes. Even after the phone call is made to Delaware, it may be that Delaware says, yeah, they really just want to be in Gahanna. And that handshake that Nate's part of, it really does work. Like, okay, great, let's talk to them. The ones that we want to be careful of are the ones that literally just call every community along the I-270 Outer Belt and say, what will you give me? And now there are some,
And they do it again every 10 to 15 years whenever the abatement runs out.
that's exactly the point I was going to make, is that if they're going to do that to you, or if they're going to do that to the home community now, you can be rest assured when their lease is up or their abatement burns off, they'll be doing the same thing, and they'll be calling the town just south of you, they're just north of you. So that's the kind of thing you just want to be careful, like who are you making friends with, because you may be in that tough spot quite soon once that incentive goes away.
Thank you. I have another couple of questions for you. So I thank you again, and it's really good to hear you talk a little bit about the difference between interest-based negotiation versus positional negotiation. And I think that that's really great to hear that that's really going on kind of in your day-to-day work. So I appreciate that and how important it is in moving these deals forward. I was really interested in some of the slides that were on the first presentation that kind of got sent to us, the Goldilocks porridge slides,
Right.
and a little bit more about the ROI kind of approaches and analyses. Could you give us kind of a rundown and
Share the OEDA slides too.
just a little bit kind of on the difference, I guess, between the different approaches on ROI, and you provided us also with this great article from Stanford, and maybe for Nate or for Jeff. You guys are like a meeting of minds, I can tell, so whoever is best suited.
No, you go for your slide first, back first.
So, and I want to make sure that I direct my comment to your question. So on return on investment, just see, well,
That's fine, I'm pulling them up. See, Council, I'm actually really excited that the councilman actually did the pre-reading. I'm always worried that when I send these things, no one actually reads them. So we're cheating now.
Well, I really liked that you had this kind of the concepts in here about really thinking through what are the benefits of an abatement, and are they really going to address the need of the business? And also that you said, don't rely on the private developer's financial pro forma, be comfortable with kind of digging into their spreadsheets.
okay. Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Bowers. The deer in the headlights is now washed away. I'm here. Okay. So what I found is that he or she who owns the data often owns the negotiation when it comes to these incentives. And so it's very important, at least from my standpoint, that Nate does his ROI calculator, or I would run that spread that I had. I know you couldn't see it, it was too small, but to understand if somebody is going to ask for an incentive, run the numbers first, and then tell them, because a lot of times I'd get folks who'd say, well, I want an incentive. Do you understand what it means? Well, no, not really. Do you even know what your commercial real estate tax millage load is? No. And so you just take it apart, right, and unpack it. So that the return on investment conversation would be, well, and I used it as a brief example earlier in my comments, that you see the pro forma from the developer, they needed $300,000 to get a project done, but if you own the data for how the incentive works, as Nate does, and as I tried to do as well, you would know that if you offered a 15-year abatement for 100%, you knew that that would actually well beyond overpay the $300,000 needed for the project. So it came down to having a spreadsheet for each and every project, or program rather, that we ran, so we would know what the value of it would be truly to a developer on an estimated basis. So you'd say, well, I don't know that that project is worth that, or you need this, and I can get you what you need with half the incentive amount that you're asking me for.
Well, and circling back to the councilman's comment around the Stanford analysis, and what we actually do opportunity-wise in that ROI calculation, and what they're looking for is trying to figure out where that balance is at the end of the day. It's figuring out, to Mr. Harris's comment around what makes the most sense for the private development community versus the public side of it. What the council oftentimes sees from me is that final ROI calculator that I pulled together through, and again, we've had this conversation in these chambers actually regularly. That ROI calculator is an evolving tool. It's something that was developed through Ohio University in their economic development program with Jason Jolly, but it's something that we continue to evolve in and to find that balance. There's no To me, there's no silver bullet, there's no easy button on this, because at the end of the day, it's how we envision the development happening, and where we find the most value on the public side is where the leverage is going to happen. If we really want to prioritize manufacturing jobs and food production manufacturing jobs, and that's going to have a different weight to it than, say, if we were going to evaluate what medical jobs look like or what general office jobs look like. Does that make sense? And so to me, that's how you kind of always continuing to tip those scales and prioritize ROI, because ROI in a deal is very different depending on how you're prioritizing and how you're putting your own thumb on the scale from a public sector standpoint. And by the way, one thing that Jeff does touch on in that original slide deck is, and he also noted it in tonight's slide presentation, is, we strictly talk about dollars and cents. Time can be just as critical of a component and value in these deals than anything else. If you can save time in the rezoning process, which you may hear a little bit about tonight, or on infrastructure development programming, or workforce alignment, or school relationship building and internship, that brings just as much value, if not more at times, to a project than the dollars and cents of an abatement or an income tax credit of some sort.
Yeah, that really brings it back to that interest-based negotiation versus positional. Yeah, thank you. Any other discussions or comments from council? Any other closing comments from Director Strum or Mr. Harris?
Just a reminder, we have one more session. It's called Pulling It All Together. So we'll see how the last 4 presentations have gone. The next session will be the 10th of October, I believe, for that committee of the whole. And you'll see a summarization of all these presentations I'll pull together. I'll also walk through a little bit more about how do we move forward as a department and as a city in having these resources and having these frank conversations, and where I think we can make some changes, we can make some adjustments, and how we can keep driving opportunities here. Because as a landlocked community, we have to be very strategic. To Jeff's comment and my philosophy and why the mayor brought me in, there's really 2 philosophies in economic development. And it's one of either being exceptionally strategic and being hyper-targeted, or I want every deal every time. If it flies, it dies kind of mentality. And we don't have the luxury to be that kind of person and that kind of a city. So we want to be super strategic about how we approach these opportunities and make sure that we are being surgical as possible with where we want to place some of these opportunities and grow our economy. So that's all I have.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you. All right, item number 2 under discussions tonight, update from the IT department on the website contract. Mr. Schultz, good evening.